that takes us to the shooter himself, one Adam Lanza. And I have the people that I've been speaking with as well as myself, one of the things that we really looked at in this whole thing was the fact that if we see any pictures of what Adam Lanza looked like, I'm not talking about pictures of him as a young man or a boy. I'm talking about any pictures that were released of him towards the later part of his life. He looked to be about 150 to 160 pounds from the photos that we've seen. And I have a little bit of a problem believing that somebody who's 150 to 160 pounds drove to the school, dressed in all black, wearing a mask, got out of his vehicle in the parking lot, and strapped 40-plus pounds of weapons and ammunition and armor to his body, and walked up to whatever point of entry he used to enter the school without any video surveillance taking place. I find it very unlikely that an awkward, mentally ill 20-year-old kid with limited training was able to accomplish all of this on his own at random, okay? And the reason why I say this, Sean, is because I do a lot of SWAT training. My friends do a lot of SWAT training. A lot of the guys that I work with are on SWAT or an equivalent unit. They're firearms trainers. And I'm 5'9", about 200 pounds. I'm in really good shape. I train a lot. I shoot a lot. And when I'm wearing full body armor, the most I can carry on me is a rifle, about 12 or 13 magazines, and one pistol. They're basically saying that this kid, who is about anywhere between 50 and 60 pounds lighter than me, with a hell of a lot less training, carried double the load that I would carry, and basically did all of this damage at random without having ever been seen surveilling the school or, it just seems highly unlikely.
And again, it needs to be stressed, no video or photographic evidence supporting anything that would indicate that this young person of that build that you described carried this off on his own. Nothing at all to support it in any way. And again, who were the three men who were detained? Who were the three men? Who were those guys? What sort of magical powers do they have to be detained and then just get to disappear after one of the most heinous school massacres in U.S. history?
We have not been told that any picture images or video footage was obtained of the incident by law enforcement. And to date, I have not seen a single crime scene photograph of the inside or the outside of that school. And I think that is very unusual with the amount of time that has now passed. And if we go by the official story about Lanza being a lone gunman, and that is being treated as it's clear, cut, and dry, then why is the Connecticut State Police saying that the investigation could take months? How much more evidence is there?
You're right, and it should also be stated as we list our discrepancies and inconsistencies. Here's another couple that we didn't touch on, and I know there's more. There's great researchers, all over the Internet, really moving mountains to try to get to the bottom of this thing. But it needs to be said that the elementary school principal, Dawn Lafferty Hochsprung, who was reportedly murdered that morning, and it went over the PA system in the school, somehow she was quoted later in the local newspaper giving a quote about the shooting. Now, clearly that had to be a miss-up by the reporter, quoting the wrong person, but it's still one of these discrepancies that, it just, everywhere you turn. Here's another one. Victoria Soto, one of the school teachers cited as saving children, there's a Facebook page, a Rest in Peace Facebook page created in her name 4 days before the shooting occurred. Now, again, are there explanations for that to justify that? Yeah, maybe. But again, everywhere you turn, just like 9/11. I've always said about 9/11, Mark, you got to buy like 100 magic bullet theories to buy the official story of 9/11. More than 100 magic bullet theories. At least with JFK, you just had to buy one bizarre, idiotic theory. In the case of 9/11, you got to buy hundreds of them, and this feels like the same thing. You have to believe a lot of nonsense in order to believe the official story here.
The problem with these things, Sean, is that when we really start to look at them in detail, we walk away with more questions than answers sometimes. But before we run out of time, there's a couple of other things that I want to get to that I think people really need to think about and start questioning themselves, because there's a lot of people who have followed this tragedy, and there are people on both sides of the argument. There's people that are pro-gun and people that are anti-gun, or whatever side people take. There's a lot of people that have followed this case and seen some inconsistencies, and I want to point out a few things. This is being treated like a typical school shooting, even though there are glaring differences between this incident and other past school shootings in history. And as far as we know from the official story, there's no motive at all. And they went from talking about a, quote, mystery motive to not even talking about a motive at all, where that's completely disappeared from the headlines. And this is never the case. There's always a motive. Anytime you look at a school shooting, it's the person that did the shooting was upset because he was disciplined, or he had a beef with certain kids at the school, or he was bullied, or he was an outcast. But the list goes on and on and on. But there's always a motive of some type. Part B is that no connection to the school or the victims has ever been established. In other words, they said his mother was a teacher there, then she wasn't. He attended the school, but they're not sure if he did or when. In other words, other than the fact that this school was conveniently located 2.5 miles some odd from his house, no one could establish any type of connection. They're basically saying this was 100% totally random, and I'm not really sure that a lot of the people who are looking into this buy that with a high degree of probability. Next, there's no notes or manifesto of any kind left by the shooter, okay? And whether people say that that's normal or not, you can go both ways on that. I just think that it's odd that this kid really had no he was a ghost for all intents and purposes for the last few years. And now, the whole thing about him destroying his hard drive on his computer and all that stuff.
It's very convenient.
My question, yeah, it's convenient, but my question is, anybody that is going on a suicide mission, what are you really worried about anyone finding? I mean, it's kind of hard to build a case on somebody after they're dead. What evidence was he trying to hide? That really, I thought that was kind of odd. And the last thing I want to talk about is the media themselves. And I've never seen such a poor job in reporting an incident in my career. This was the most horrendous example of a media that did almost zero fact-checking before they put out a story. The volume of misinformation is so extreme, it's even difficult to catalog it all. And people make mistakes. I can't sit here and say that anyone is perfect, but when you do make a mistake or when you do put out erroneous information, you would think that there would be some type of reason to have a retraction or a correction to the facts. And they just put out misinformation and they're on to the next thing, whether it turned out to be true or bogus. They don't even go back and correct themselves in any way, shape, or form. And the interesting thing about that is they never have to give their sources. They just say it was provided to us by a law enforcement source or someone that wants to remain anonymous. So there is no pressure on them. There is no integrity for them to basically answer for the information that they put out. Okay, and then it's also crystal clear what side the media is on in terms of the issue of gun control. They're clearly 100% anti-gun. There's almost a universal non-effort for fair and unbiased reporting on the issue of guns by the media. Okay, the same media, by the way, which is now being asked to leave Newtown, Connecticut, as they've made a nuisance of themselves, all while showing themselves to be the insensitive vultures that we already know they are. Shame on them for interviewing 5- and 6-year-old children and photographing grieving victims and their families with no restraint when they're getting news that their loved ones are killed or they're at funerals. It's disgusting behavior, all to get ratings and headlines. And I want to say, the only exception to the rule of what I'm saying about the media is Ben Swan, who is the only man among all these media whores. He's the only one out there that is true to the game, in my opinion.
And Ben Swan, God bless him, is just a local news media personality. He doesn't even have national scale. He does actually have some national impact thanks to YouTube in the alternative media, and all of us carrying his material. Thank God he's out there. Now, before I let you go, I think it's absolutely critical that we circle back here and get your opinion on where we stand as it pertains to the threats to our Second Amendment rights, Mark, because that's why we're having this conversation. This government is throwing the Second Amendment under the bus, and for many patriot-minded, liberty-minded people in the audience, many folks around the country who aren't even going to hear this interview, the Second Amendment is the line in the sand. That is the line that cannot be crossed if a government wants to have peaceful relations with its citizens. Now, you and I want absolutely nothing to do with violence. We're not advocating violence. We're both scared that violence could be the outcome of this gun grab, because the Second Amendment couldn't be more clear. The founders couldn't have been more clear, Mark. The right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And how do we get around this? What room do we have? It feels to me like we're out of wiggle room here.
Yeah, we are, but I think that is ultimately going to come down to a states' rights issue, for lack of a better term. And I don't doubt that the federal government couldn't ram this down the throats of states like Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Maryland, Delaware, the Washington, D.C. area, California. Okay, all those places will go willingly, even though there's millions of gun owners in those states who are going to be upset about it. I have a hard time seeing the federal government forcing their will on places like Texas, Arizona, Florida, New Mexico, Oklahoma, places where they're traditionally very strong gun rights states. And that's the way it was during the original assault rifle ban, where people were still able to transfer them in those states. And, we almost had two sets of laws back then in 93 and 94, those for the red states and those for the blue. And I think it's going to be very difficult for the federal government to force their will across the board. I think you're going to see a lot of fragmentation in that area.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that it does come down to, as it does with every important issue, which is really what Ron Paul always talked about. It's take it back to the state level. The feds have absolutely no business in your bedroom. They have no business in your church. They have no business in your schools. They have no business, in your backyard, in your home, and they really have no business telling you what type of guns you can own when we all are protected by our Second Amendment rights. Why don't you tell folks about Matthew Bracken's Enemies, Foreign and Domestic? I know that is a book you're very passionate about.
Yeah, and this is something that I read in the early 2000s. And Matthew Bracken, who is a great American, wrote a book called Enemies, Foreign and Domestic, which talks about how the federal government staged an incident with an assault weapon where a bunch of people were massacred in a stadium, and they basically used that as the catalyst to enact all kinds of draconian gun control measures. And the book talks about what happens post that incident and how patriots responded and what happened. And it paints a very interesting graphic picture of what could happen in a post-incident world. And I think that it's a good read. It's food for thought for people. And I think that what I really want people to understand is that, again, we're not saying that it happened this way or that way. We're saying you should not put anything past your government at this point. And that's what people need to keep an open mind about. There's a lot of details on what did or did not happen here. But if anybody that has any analytical thinking looks at this stuff, there's glaring holes. And if there's glaring holes, it means that something could be amiss. And I don't think people should dismiss that because they want some type of outcome that feels more pleasing to their heart or their mind for whatever reason.
Yeah, you're right. And for those of us who are informed about history, Mark, we all know about Operation Gladio. We know about, Operation Paperclip, in which the Nazis, after World War II, top Nazi scientists were brought here and folded into the NASA space program. We know about the Gulf of Tonkin lies. We know about the JFK assassination. We know about 9/11. We know about all of these things that have been used time and time and time again to expand government power under the pretense of some false story. And it appears to you and I both that this is what's happening again with the Sandy Hook Elementary massacre and with this gun grab. And it's just absolutely shameful. And for any of us who have come to this conclusion, it's really horrifying, Mark, because the official stories are always more palatable, They're always more palatable than the alternative, which is an out-of-control secret government or secret entity within the government that is hell-bent on destroying the constitutional rights of Americans and destroying liberty. Because, I can deal with Adam Lanza. I can deal with Timothy McVeigh. Okay, I can deal with Osama bin Laden mentally. What is far more hard to deal with is really, really bad guys in high positions of power doing traitorous things to the American people, because that's not something that's easily curable.
I agree. And what does it say about the American public, about what they believe and how many people are out there that believe in the things that we're talking about, if the shelves at gun stores are empty? What does that say?
Well, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, to me, it says that a lot more folks are awake than the mainstream media will ever report on, and that maybe even you and I aren't giving credit for. I mean, you're absolutely right. People are awake, because for people to be buying guns hand over fist to the point where gun stores are literally having the best days that they've ever had in the history of being open says a lot. You're absolutely right. And ultimately, it gets me back to this line in the sand. This issue for a lot of Americans is the last line in the sand. Our Second Amendment rights must be defended, because once we're disarmed, a tyrannical, out-of-control government can take it to the next level. History shows this to be true. Once the people are disarmed, the real horrors will begin.
Well, the thing that I really want people to think about and research on their own is that when you look at the history of gun control in different countries, in different parts of the world, at different points of history, things never happen overnight. Everything that happens is always incremental. And people don't understand in this country that the Second Amendment has nothing to do with self-protection or hunting. It was written into the Constitution as a check and a balance against a tyrannical government. And it's very difficult for me to argue against the fact that we have a tyrannical government in place right now. And what that tyrannical government is doing is it is slowly but surely eroding the Second Amendment a little bit at a time. And basically, the Second Amendment is the only teeth that the sheep have left to check that tyrannical government. And those teeth are being filed down a little bit at a time, before you know it. It just hurts when they bite. The teeth don't tear anything. And that's what we're being set up for. And in my opinion, this is only the beginning.
It's boiling frogs. You're absolutely right. It's boiling frogs, although now we're all feeling the heat. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. We're all being burned alive here. So people are taking action, standing up, speaking out. That's the reason we're having this conversation. That's the reason there's a petition to deport Piers Morgan. Mark, thanks for all that you're doing. Appreciate your voice. Appreciate you giving us an update on your opinions on Sandy Hook Elementary, the massacre there, and your opinions on this gun grab. Any final words for the audience?
Right now, I just want to say keep your eyes and ears open, and don't buy into the hype. In other words, this too shall pass. No matter what they do, there's going to be ammunition out there. There's no reason for anybody to pay $1 a round for ammunition. Just let the dust settle on this, and the industry will catch up with stuff. I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy semi-auto rifles or high-capacity magazines, because we don't know what's going to happen with that stuff, but don't get sucked into spending a lot more than you have to for certain things right now.
All right, Mark. Well, thanks again. And everybody, thanks for tuning in. Mark and I both wish you a very happy new year. 2013 promises to be only more interesting than even 2012. And at the end of the day, we're all in this mess together. So, Mark, thanks for your voice. And everybody else, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, Mark, let's stay in touch.
Okay, Rob. Take care.
You too, man.
Well, guys, that'll do it. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really can't thank you enough. Please tune in to sgtreport.com for the very latest in alternative news. Thanks for watching.